Okay, so what we'll do, we'll start right away. So thanks very much for all of you for participating to this session. Thanks as well to our partner Horizon3. That is actually our partner for this event. So thanks, Heine, for being there, and Dennis and Stefan, if he's there. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all. So I won't do like a big presentation about eSecure. You all know, I mean, who we are, as you're our customers for most of you. So we'll go also straight to the point, as we have like 1 hour to cover this very passionate topic. So we actually started our partnership with Horizon3 about a few weeks ago, after testing the solution for about 2 months, where we run some POCs at some of our customers. But now, let's say it's official for around 2-3 weeks. We're let's say a partner of Horizon3, and so this is why we are here today, to bring you really this solution that is today a cutting-edge solution that is really replying to a real need that we have here in the region. So from what we could see, and the results that we actually had during the tests that we ran were really impressing. So this is why we are here today, and with no more time, I will hand over to Heine. Heine, please,
Yes,
can
thank
you
you.
introduce yourself, and
Yeah, thank you.
let's move on.
So sorry about my voice, because usually I should stay in bed because I'm having a little flu. But anyhow, so yes, my name is Rainer Richter. I'm the Vice President of EMEA and APAC here at Horizon3. Joined the company in December of 2021, so I'm almost finishing my second year with the company. Horizon3 by itself is a company fully based in the United States. So I've been the first employee outside of the US, followed, by the way, by Dennis. And meanwhile, we are a team of 4 in Europe. And of course, we will continue to grow. I will come up to our founders during the presentation. I would really like to start directly into the presentation and hand then over to Dennis Weil, our senior system engineer, who will give you a live demo. And I think this is what you're even more interested about than in seeing here hundreds of different slides. Okay, what we clearly do is, what are we doing? We are delivering a penetration testing service to help you to see your IT infrastructure from an attacker's perspective. And as you might see then later on, we have many people with a military background in our organization. And at the military, there is a very old tactics, which is called turning the map around, to get inside the mind of the enemy. And I would to be better prepared what might come. And I would say, especially in the terms of cybersecurity and let's say protection against attacks, it's not the question of the if, it's more the question of the when you will get attacked. Snehal Antani, our CEO and co-founder, is the former CIO of GE Capital. He was already on the customer side in the finance industry. In that role, by the way, he was the youngest CIO of a company listed in the Dow Jones Index. Then he became the CTO of Splunk. And then he decided to serve his country and became the first CTO of the JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, which is an overlay function of all of the US Armed Forces. In all 3 positions, Snehal had one of the deepest pockets in terms of budgets for cybersecurity. But he got always asked about, can you validate that we are secure? Can you validate that all those different tools are working properly together and we are safe against attackers? And the answer was, no, I can't. I can't do this until we're getting attacked. And that is something what I would not like to have, to be honest. And that brought him, of course, then on the idea that NodeZero would, something like NodeZero would be a proper solution for the market. And then together with Tony Pelletier, our other co-founder, they started in 2017 with working on the let's say the algorithms of the AI, which is now base of NodeZero, that the solution is developing in the route where it's now. In 2019, then they started. They hired 12 founding developers. 2/3 of them with military background, 1/3 coming from the private sector. They are all still with us with the company. And in 2021, the product was ready to go to market. That is then when Bob Caridi came on board as our Chief Revenue Officer, and I came in as VP International. One other challenge most of you might have is to concentrate to fix what matters, or to identify to fix what matters. Very often you have your security tools, they might tell you there is a vulnerability, but there are so many which which are not affecting you. So the toughest question is always which vulnerabilities you should not touch. But if it's the right, you only know when it might be too late, because then you got breached. So you might have a couple of tools also in your environment. Think about the vulnerability scanners. They're producing a lot of noise, but they're not telling you what is exploitable. And give you an idea, last year, so in 2022, our partners and customers have made with NodeZero about 6,000 penetration tests, which is a huge number, by the way. Out of these with the 6,000 penetration tests, we found about 60,000 exploitable vulnerabilities in the customers' networks. Only 6.2% of them were just pure vulnerabilities. All others were just combination either of vulnerabilities or something totally different. So that means if you trust on a vulnerability scanner, you have to be aware that you are ignoring more than 90% of the potential risk, called that way. The manual pen test is always an incomplete snapshot. It depends on the quality of the pen tester. It depends on the scope. It depends on the number of days this pen tester or this team of pen testers is allowed to work. And clearly, we do not have enough pen testers to do regular penetration tests. And those of you who are working together with companies inside the European Union, which might then also be that you are affected by the DORA regulation or by the NIS2 regulation, then I can tell you that the target here then should be 1 pen test a month. And if you do this the traditional way, it won't work. The security risk management tools, a little bit like the vulnerability scanner, it tells you there's a potential risk. You have to validate yes, no. Is it affecting my network? Yes, no. If no, take it away. But it's always producing pressure on you, and you have to decide quickly if you have to do or not. And finally, another big part are these breach attack simulation tools, BAS solutions. They have 2 challenges. First one is you have to install even more agents. And to install more agents works as long as you have a server, a workstation, a laptop, a tablet. But it's mission impossible in terms of IoT devices. Think about routers, switches, network cameras, other network components. And it's strictly forbidden in the whole OT world. So think about healthcare environment, think about production environment. As soon as you add a client on an agent on such a device, the warranty might fall away. And then, of course, and as a second thing, you have to develop those script fake tests where you should think and act like an attacker. And I'm sure I think all of you do not have enough criminal energy to think like an attacker. And that is where then our mission with our solution comes in. With NodeZero, we provide you an autonomous penetration testing service for a continuous find, fix, and verify process. So that means by one autonomous pen test, you can identify new exploitable attack vectors. So that means NodeZero is not producing any false positives. And then based on the prioritization of the risk factor, you can start fix the vulnerabilities, whatever weakness had been detected. And as soon as you've done it, fixed it, you can verify if those fixes have been effectively. And of course, you can report. So that means you then start really in a permanent find, fix, and verify process. And if you want, you could do a pen test a week or even a pen test a day. So we have many customers who are now in a process saying, okay, we always patch on Tuesday, we pen test then on Wednesday, we fix on Thursday, and we go home early and relaxed on Friday because we know we are safe. NodeZero is delivered as a pure SaaS solution. The SaaS instance is located in Frankfurt in Germany under the strict German data protection rules, the one for Europe. Of course, we also have another instance for the United States. We have two different pen tests running. One is the pen test against the parameter, which is a very easy one because usually those small numbers of IP addresses should be kept under control more easily. And we have the internal penetration test, which is the much more powerful tool. For the internal penetration test, you have to install a small little Docker container, which only acts as the gateway towards the SaaS instance in Frankfurt. And then as soon as you have this Docker container up and running, it takes you less than 10 minutes via a self-service user interface that you can design your pen tests by yourself. Dennis will show that to you in a couple of minutes. I can tell you, my son, when he was 11 years old, he pen tested his school by doing that. And the way he did it was very simple. He got trained, of course, how to install the Docker container. He configured the pen test. Of course, he asked his professor before. It took exactly 7 minutes, 32 seconds. And after this, he would have been able to become Windows domain admin access. So that means by using NodeZero, you do not need consultants or professional services to run the pen test. You might want to use them to the consultants or the professional services to tell you the findings. And Dennis will also show you how you can work with them. And I believe many of you will even understand what are the impacts of those weaknesses, because that's also shown in the report. And so that means NodeZero is also helping you to fulfill mandatory requirements based on the NIS2 and the DORA directive. I know Switzerland is not part of the EU, but I would not be surprised if some of those things would then also be taken over from the Swiss government. So NodeZero as itself acts as an APT. It's an orchestration of more than 150 offensive tools. And very important, it's safe to run in production. That means you do not have to wait for service windows, whatever needed. And Dennis will also address this in his presentation. And also, you do not have to provide any credentials to NodeZero. As NodeZero is a cloud service, it also connects with cloud intelligence. So that means we are looking for information, for example, in LinkedIn via the LinkedIn API to identify employees or former employees of your company or of the company. But we're also connecting with some typically darknet information. So that is information what also a professional hacker would use to get into your network. So that means NodeZero is using the same techniques as a physical, very clever 20 years experience hacker would use or attacker would use. And with this APT tactics and the knowledge graphic analytics, NodeZero is developing its own cyber terrain map at each pen test from scratch new. I would say that is the point when I hand over to Dennis if there aren't any questions at the moment.
Quickly let me share my screen with you so I can actually show to you how this actually works in real life. It's quite hard to always find the right level of detail for these, especially in a large group as ours is today. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat as Nelson asked, and I will try to reserve a couple of minutes in the end to make sure we get as many of them addressed as possible. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do this during the presentation today. Okay, everyone should be able to see my screen now. What you're seeing right now is essentially the portal login page to the cloud component of NodeZero that Rainer already mentioned. I will be logging into a quick demo environment here to show you what would be possible in it once you have access. The first important thing to know here is that this login page is actually the last bit of NodeZero that is a shared instance. Everything beyond that, so everything you're seeing right now, is my own tenant of NodeZero, essentially. NodeZero was purposefully designed to run in the cloud and make use fully of things like microservices to ensure that there's no data being shared between different customers because of them running on the same server or something like that. Everything is uniquely created just for you. On top of that, it was also designed with having a variety of different users in mind here with different kinds of backgrounds. So NodeZero can offer a lot of benefit to an experienced pen tester that has been doing pen tests for maybe 20 years or 10 years or something like that, but also for, let's say, a regular network admin IT person that does not have any previous pen testing background. Both can get a lot of value out of it, really depending on what they're looking for. As Rainer mentioned, it's quite easy to run a pen test here. There's multiple ways of doing it. The most comfortable one typically is just using the GUI and use the run pen test function, where you could actually chose which one you want. As mentioned, we have an internal and an external pen test and a variety of special things. In the interest of time, I will not configure one, but it will literally take you less than 5 minutes to configure it if you do it for the first time. And if you've done it a few times, it will probably be a minute or two, or even as far down as getting this automated. So this small container Rainer mentioned, for example, a lot of our customers really like to have many of these. So as all the work is done in the cloud, the hardware requirements for these containers, which could either be a standard Docker container or a virtual machine, they are very slim. We're talking about 8 gigabytes of memory here. So this can run on any kind of old hardware, or if you have a hypervisor running somewhere, there's typically some room left for it. And what our customers really like to do is to have more than one of these, just because it is quite comfortable to have, for example, one in every of your branches, or if you have a zero trust environment, one in every segment, and then automate the pen test with it. So, for example, they could use our scheduler to run an automated pen test on Monday that would look for an attack or would run a pen test from the perspective of an attacker that, for example, compromised their workstation segment. On a Tuesday, they might run a different pen test from their DMZ or from another branch or something. It's totally up to you how you want to use it. And as NodeZero comes as an annual subscription with basically an all-you-can-eat flat rate attached to it, you can run as many pen tests with it as you like. And besides setting it up initially, there's also no further work involved for you. So it doesn't really take 10 times as long to run pen test that it will take you to run one, because NodeZero will make all the decisions required autonomously on its own without requiring any human intervention somewhere in between. The only thing that's left for you to do is wait for the email that will tell you that the sample or that the report is ready, and look at the report. And to give you an example of how such a report might look like, I prepped a little one here, just to give you an idea about the level of detail and what kind of power this autonomous decision-making engine has, for example. Every report comes in different forms. So you will have more traditional PDF-based reports in different levels of detail. For example, there will be an executive summary for the C-level that will have just the most essential data in it, just a couple of pages. As you can see here, this one has 6 pages only. You could also, of course, get a more detailed report out of it, which in this case has more than 80 pages with, of course, a lot more additional detail in here. As you can see, there is all kinds of information in here. And a couple of others. You can get raw data, you can get a docx to modify the report, whatever you can imagine, essentially. The downside of these kinds of reports always has been that PDF, by the nature of things, is a static document. So you can't really properly filter data or drill down into areas that piqued your interest and you want to know more about. This is something a PDF can't offer. And this is why we also offer this web-based version you're seeing right now, where you have those kinds of functionalities. So everything you see here, you can click on and drill down into it. But even on the summary page, there's already a lot of information. So it will start again with a high-level summary section, which will only tell you about the most critical impacts, but it immediately goes into more detail here as well, like showing you which MITRE attack techniques we used, showing you which credentials we harvested, and what kind of attack vectors we were able to do with them. So, for example, 28 critical ones and 101 low ones, and that kind of data, essentially. And of course, a lot of others. And as I mentioned, you can drill into every one of those aspects. So for example, if I want to know what those 115 weaknesses we found were, I just click on this and it will show me a list of all those weaknesses. Here I could now filter it, see something like, I just want to see the critical ones, and it will filter this down, and maybe I only want to see certain ones, it will filter this down again, really depending on what my interest is here. For some of you, this might look familiar if you've ever worked with something like a vulnerability scanner, but the quality and the content of this report is actually quite different from what those vulnerability scanners can typically provide. In the interest of time, I will only be able to show you a few of the differences here, but these, I hope, will already give you a good understanding what the difference is. The overarching major difference is the entirely different perspective of NodeZero. The vulnerability scanner has been developed to show you and tell you which vulnerabilities a certain individual system has. So it will look at every one of your hosts, your servers, whatever it is, as an island, just that individual host, and will tell you what kind of indicators of vulnerabilities it can find. And this already includes by design a lot of shortcomings. The first one being, and I'm sure if you've ever had worked with one of those reports, this will be familiar to you, is that vulnerability scanners traditionally have a very high false positive rate. Depending on the environment, we see somewhere between 10% to up to 90% of false positives in those reports, which means once you have the report, you would now have to put someone on the report to root out all those false positives. And that someone typically has to have a very good understanding of IT security, of how a vulnerability scanner works, and so on, in order to really determine if something is a false positive or not. So you will need a highly qualified and skilled resource for this. With NodeZero, this is different. We actually have a 0 false positive rate, and we can achieve this by simply testing everything we find with a benign piece of exploit code first before we put it into the list. So instead of just looking for an indicator that some vulnerability might exist, NodeZero will actually verify it by running that mentioned benign exploit code against it. And only if we successfully ran it, it will make it into the report. So this on its own will already save you a lot of time and pain by not showing you all those false positives. The second big difference is, again, a matter of perspective. So a vulnerability scanner will do just that. It will scan for vulnerabilities, traditional CVEs. NodeZero, on the other hand, is aiming to give you the perspective of an attacker on your network. And an attacker will not only look for CVEs. Of course, if he finds one, he will gladly exploit it. But if he won't find one, he will just live off the land and do something else. If you look at most of those poor companies that have been breached in the last couple of years that made it into the press, you will see that only a fraction of these were actually exploited by someone using a CVE. Most of them actually came based on someone not following best practices. And these could be all kinds of things, of course, but NodeZero will look for these. So for example, someone misconfigured a service, someone chose a weak password, someone left a default account in place, these kinds of things. As you can see in this list here, the first three are actually these kinds of issues that we found here. So this is stuff that a CVE scanner, a vulnerability scanner, will never show you because they're not able to look for these. But they're very valid security issues. So NodeZero will do that. It will look for that. And it will, of course, tell you if it finds them. So it, again, will give you a much broader, more complete picture of the issues you have in your network compared to a vulnerability scanner. The third thing that I want to show here, and the last one, is about priorities. So again, if you get a report like this or any kind of report, like from a vulnerability scanner maybe, there's typically two questions you have to ask yourself. The first one will be, what do you fix first? Which of those issues is actually the one that's the most painful, most critical, the one that's carrying the most risk for you? And the second question is typically even harder to answer. And this is, where do you stop with the fixing? So where do you draw your line where you say everything below that line is where I accept the remaining risk of those issues being there because I just don't have the resources to fix them all. But I understand them well enough to know that the remaining risk is something I can live with. And typically, in order to answer those two questions, what you would have to do now is rank all those findings according to your environment, your specific situation. Because most vulnerability scanners won't do that for you. They will just tell you like a generic ranking for a certain weakness, which will be the same in any kind of environment it is encountered. But this, of course, does not reflect the truth, because a certain vulnerability might be way more severe in one environment than in the next, because you might have certain, let's say, devices in your infrastructure that are just especially perceptive or vulnerable to something. Or there might be other weaknesses in play that a skilled attacker might combine with this weakness in order to achieve a greater impact. And again, as a vulnerability scanner will only look at each system individually, it lacks the capabilities to see that bigger picture and to understand that in your environment, something might be more or less of a problem. NodeZero, on the other hand, again, it has the perspective of an attacker. An attacker is in general not interested in vulnerabilities. An attacker is interested in gaining access to your data, putting you in a situation where he can basically demand a ransom or break something. Vulnerability is just a way to get to what he wants. It's just a tool in his box. But he has, of course, also, if it's a good attacker at least, the capabilities to understand that he can and has to combine certain weaknesses to achieve his goal. And this is what vulnerability scanners are lacking, but a capability NodeZero has. So it can understand that it is in a specific environment, and it can actually appropriately rank those vulnerabilities according to your specific situation. So you're again saving a lot of time and skilled resource time to not have to do the scoring for yourself, which again would require someone with a lot of pen testing knowledge and knowledge of your unique environment as well. To give you an example, if we look at this issue here that we found, which is SMB signing being not required on this one host. This is actually quite a common thing. I would wager that probably half of the people in this session today will have instances of their servers not requiring SMB signing. It's typically not a big deal. It's typically harmless, and this is why we also would give it a base score of 1 in the risk rating here. But as you can see here, in this case, because of the red arrow, NodeZero decided to raise this to a 10 out of 10. So to basically the top of the list. And the reason is that NodeZero understood that actually it could leverage this one weakness on this specific server in 28 different attack chains that led to some or another kind of critical impact, in this case, including things like compromising that user's Active Directory. And because of that, it raised this up to a 10. Actually, just fixing this issue on this one server would eliminate 27% of all the critical attack chains by severing them at this point in the chain. So it's definitely something you want to look at very early in your fixing efforts and not as a 1 out of 10. So basically, most likely never. And the reason why NodeZero can do that is because it has the capabilities to not only answer the what question, the what question being, what is your problem? What are your weaknesses? But also the so what question. So what would that actually mean to you if someone would compromise this? And this is something NodeZero can do. It has the capabilities to chain together those weaknesses to achieve meaningful impacts. It understands that 1 + 1 does not necessarily mean 2, or it could also mean 50, really depending on what the weaknesses are it was able to find. This is where it is unique compared to everything else on the market because of this autonomous decision-making engine that has been trained with more than 30,000 pen tests in customer environments so far. It has this experience to know that. This is also what sets apart a junior hacker with very little or no experience to a senior hacker with 20 years of experience, and hacker being replaceable with the word pen tester here as well. So this is true as well. If you have someone in that is an experienced seasoned pen tester, he might be able to build these attack chains. If he has less experience, he might not be able to do that. And to give you an example of this, we have this Sankey diagram down here, which will actually show you those relationships between weaknesses and impacts. On the left, you will see the top weaknesses. So if I would only be able to answer the what question, what is your problem? I would tell you, hey, you're vulnerable to NetBIOS name service poisoning. If you now don't have a really big background in pen testing, this will basically or most likely not mean anything to you. You will now know you're vulnerable to NetBIOS name service poisoning. But what this could actually mean to you, what kind of result an attacker would be able to achieve, what kind of an impact he would be able to make based on exploiting that, this is something you will most likely be oblivious to at this point in time. And as you can see in the Sankey diagram, there is a relationship to those impacts over here. And we, for example, utilize this NetBIOS name service poisoning technique to achieve a domain compromise, so to actually take over that customer's Active Directory. And of course, we can also drill down into these further to check what kind of issues we were able to harvest here. As you can see in the overview already, there is two, the first and the last, which are standard, regular run-of-the-mill kind of CVEs that we exploited. These are actually low-skill attacks. This is something even a junior attacker could probably do. They're easily exploited, but they're also easily prevented by just fixing those issues. And they are typically also very easy to find because it's an individual system with an individual weakness that will be exploited by an individual piece of exploit code. So all on the same device, essentially. So this is not really a lot of magic there. The two in the middle, on the other hand, they are actually way more interesting because as you can see for these two, we actually used valid domain admin accounts of that environment of that customer to compromise that Active Directory. And of course, we can still drill down further into this to show you exactly what we did here. And this is also something that's unique to NodeZero, that we will always show in the utmost detail what we did. So there is no smoke or mirrors or black magic included here. You don't have to trust anything we say. We can actually prove everything we say. So this again starts with a small, let's say, high-level narrative of what this attack included. But as you can see down here, we will also show you a detailed representation of the attack chain. Or technically, this time it was two separate chains that came together in the end to the domain compromise. And every one of these is something you can also click on. So as you can see here, when NodeZero started, it found a host about a minute later, and about 4 minutes after that, it recognized that this host is actually vulnerable to what's called the NetMouse name service poisoning technique. And if you now have no clue what that means, as I mentioned, you just click on this, and NodeZero will explain to you in simple words, hey, this is actually a man-in-the-middle attack that is used to capture hashes or login credentials in plain text from someone who tries to log into something. If you want to know more about it, we will also reference all the MITRE attack techniques we used. So you can also read up in great detail about this technique if you really want to. But if you don't want to, this typically suffices. What's also quite important here, you can see this small proof button over here. This actually corresponds to this bottom left side of the report here, where you can actually see which command we used with which parameters to actually achieve this attack and what the result was we captured. So as I mentioned, totally transparent. You could, in theory, even take this and reproduce this without needing NodeZero in the first place. So if you really don't trust anything we did here, you can try to do this on your own. The more seasoned pen testers in the session will probably say, yeah, but for a man in the middle, this also depends a bit on luck. Of course, for a man in the middle, there has to be a matching packet traversing the network. But of course, this is something that can be reproduced with the right amount of time. As you can see in the proof, we actually collected a login token for the user AJ Smith with a certain hash. And as you can also see, the hash will actually be obfuscated so that no one can actually make use of this, because only the first and the last 2 digits will be in clear text. Everything else is asterisked out, so that you can still compare it against the real hash if you have it by any chance. But you can't really do anything nasty with the one that's in the report here. This is now a good time to maybe speak a bit about this autonomous decision making I mentioned before. So most solutions out there will at best use some static ways to run their automated pen tests. Our autonomy is different here. The automated pen tester will follow static descriptions of what to do. It could be a script, it could be a playbook, something like that. NodeZero, on the other hand, will make individual, unique decisions based on the specific environment it is in and based on the findings it already has available to it. So it's like the difference, like training a supercomputer by telling it or teaching it 100,000 different chess matches, or alternatively to really teach it to understand the rules of chess and to know what different moves are available and things like that. The first one will only get you that far because it will only cover those 100,000 matches. If your opponent does a move that was not in one of those matches, you're screwed. And on the other hand, if you understand how to play the game, you can make your own decisions. And the same is true for NodeZero here, and it's comparable to what an attacker or a pen tester would do. So essentially, every time a new item shows up on this attack chain, NodeZero will run one of those autonomous decision-making cycles and will look at what do I know so far? What can I do with that? What would be the best next step to take here? And it can even go back in time to revisit old decisions it made in the past when it didn't have the same level of information it has now, and maybe do another decision based on that. It's totally up to the available information, and because of that, the architecture of those attack chains will become way more advanced than what those static tools can do. So we will find way more impacts and weaknesses than those other tools because they just don't have the capabilities to take it to that level. In this specific case, NodeZero now decided to check if that hash that it just collected maybe originated from a weak password. So he sent it off to one of the hash crackers. And as you can see in this proof over here, it actually successfully found out the password by cracking it. So it now upgraded from an NTLM hash and a username to a clear text password and a username. And when roughly 10 minutes later, it detects that on this domain controller over here, an SMB service is running, it remembers this credential and decides to try to log into this. And as you can see in the proof down here, not only did it succeed in that, it also figured out that this user actually has access to admin level shares. So it concludes that this has to be a domain admin, which in turn would qualify this as a domain compromise situation, because now we could actually kick out all the valid admins and take over the domain and ask for a ransom, or we could create additional accounts, take it further, whatever one could imagine someone doing once they become domain admin. But as I mentioned, because of this autonomy, NodeZero also will not only look for one way of doing things. Just please remember the 5-minute 25 timestamp here, because if we go into the other attack chain, you will see that this one looks a bit more complex, and it will have the same puzzle piece here, the NetBIOS name service poisoning technique, which was found at 525, if you remember. But this time, instead of combining it with the hash cracker, which only was successful because the user actually chose a weak password, this time NodeZero decides to combine it with a different weakness it already found earlier in the scan, which is actually that this guy over here does not require SMB signing, which in this case makes it vulnerable to a relay or replay attack. It's also called a pass-to-hash attack, which allows NodeZero to attack this without actually needing to have the actual password, but instead by using the hash it already has. Because as you can see in the proof down here, this time it was able to log into that server using a hash. And what it did next was just dumping the local SAM database, finding additional users and additional hashes. And in this case, then deciding to use this administrator down here to now compromise the domain with that user. So two totally different attack vectors coming to the same result, but both are, of course, worth being fixed based on the findings it did here. And these were only two of tons of things we found here. And regardless of which category we go in, let's say sensitive data exposure, which also could be named data exfiltration possible or something like that. If we go into one of these, you can see they all follow the same narrative. So there will always be a high-level explanation and then a graphic representation of the attack chain. As you can see in this case, this actually required NodeZero to combine 4 different strands of attacks or scans to actually come to this conclusion where it gained access to files on this share. So this is actually highly complex. I recently had a customer where we had a few attacks that actually required 10 different chains to come together in the end. So this is more or less limitless of what NodeZero can do here. And it's all based on this autonomous decision-making engine and those tens of thousands of pen tests it has as experience under his belt. This on its own is already very powerful. If you now combine this with the fact that NodeZero is also safe to run in production, so you can, and it's basically a flat rate, which means you can run it as often as you like, every day or something like that. This, of course, empowers you to throw a much tighter security net around your environment by not just running a pen test once a year with the human pen tester, but instead as often as you like. And this will also enable you to do what Rainer already mentioned, which we call is the find, fix, verify loop. Obviously, NodeZero will help you in finding those issues, as we've seen here, but it will also help you in fixing these, not only by giving you this great list without those false positives, already pre-ranked for your environment and so on, but it will even tell you how to fix those issues. If you go into an issue and click on the fix action button, you can see that we will actually provide, in this case, 4 different options on how you can get rid of this. So we will even save you the detour to Google or wherever you want to go to find out how to get rid of this. And finally, it will also help you in verification. So in verifying what that the problem has actually been fixed properly. Because this is also something we encounter quite often, that we do a pen test in a customer environment and we stumble across issues where the customer claims they fixed this ages ago, and we detect that yeah, they probably fixed it, but they forgot a few servers or something went wrong on those few servers. So it's imperative, extremely important that you also verify that you fixed something properly. And with NodeZero, as it's a flat rate, you can just run another pen test and run it through our compare function over here, which will show you the difference between this pen test and whatever older one you selected in the compare function. Or if you only fixed like a couple of things and you don't want to run an entire pen test, you can also do what we call a one-click verify, where you put this specific issue here in a small shopping cart, and then fill it up with as many weaknesses as you like that you fixed during the day or the week or something like that, and then click run one-click verify down here in order to create a new customized, let's say, stripped down version of a pen test that will only try to look for those issues on those servers that you put in the basket here. And this, of course, will come back to you with a response much quicker than a regular pen test, and which will probably be something like, hey, out of those 5 things you told me to check for, 4 of them are actually no longer exploitable. So you can actually now check them off your list. Number 5 is still exploitable for some reason, however, so you will have to re-verify that one. Maybe you forgot to reboot the server or something like that. So this, of course, in total, with this loop in place, allows you to shift the way you work way away from this red team comes in once a year, gives the blue team a beating, blue team feels bad about it and now fixes all the issues for over months. Then the red team comes back and gives them another beating because some of the fixes were not successful and a ton of new issues came up in the meantime and so on. And move beyond this to more like a purple teaming approach with a much quicker, let's say, feedback cycle, because you will know immediately or more or less immediately if the thing you fixed is properly fixed, and also if a new issue comes up because you installed a patch or you installed a new server or you acquired a company with a few new systems or something like that, you just run another pen test and you will immediately know what's going on. You don't have to wait for the human pen tester to do that for you. Okay, in the interest of time, I will sadly have to stop here, so we have a bit left for questions. There is tons of additional stuff I could show you, like the external pen test, like our capabilities to run password audits against your Active Directory, our ways to integrate into phishing campaigns to automatically verify if the credentials you just phished would have enabled an attacker to gain some success somewhere, stuff like these. And tons of other stuff. But as I mentioned, in the interest of time, we only have like 8 minutes left. I will stop here for questions if there are any.
Actually, what we can do,
yep.
Thanks very much, Dennis, for the presentation. So actually what we can do, of course, this was like a teaser, so something to make you discover the technology. And if you're actually open, of course, we can do like a more specific presentation also to you, or if you want to also try the solution and so on, we can organize that for sure. So yeah, thanks very much for the presentation, Dennis. So what I can do now, thanks very much for every one of you, because I see that the 57 people that actually joined in the beginning are still there. So that's quite a good looking. So that's a good success for this webinar. So